Hello everyone, my name is Steven, and today I will be showing you all the ins and outs of MOJO upright bass. MOJO upright bass was a massive undertaking, resulting in the most complete and realistic upright bass on the market today. Before sample compression, this library contains 38 gigabytes of content from 5 different mic positions, up to 6 velocity layers and 8 round robins across a comprehensive selection of articulations. Let's start by listening to a brief demo of MOJO upright bass, showing the range and depth of what this instrument can do. Here's a look at all the sections we'll be going over for this walkthrough. Before we dive in, I just want to start by saying you do not need to own the full version of Kontakt to use this library. When you purchase a copy of MOJO Upright Bass, it comes with the free Kontakt player. Okay, let's get started. So looking at this instrument overall, you can see there are 5 main tabs to navigate at the bottom of the instrument. The Instrument tab gives you all your detailed controls over each articulation, plus an additional tab for global controls. The Performance tab gives you access to a huge collection of MIDI performances to help you get started or just to provide a little fresh inspiration. The Effects tab lets you add up to 8 different custom-picked effects to help further tailor the sound of the bass. Here in the Mixer tab, you can turn on and off different mic positions to create the perfect recording perspective for your music. The last tab is the Settings tab, where detailed customization of the instrument can be set. Now, as you've probably noticed, the top of the instrument remains the same no matter what tab is selected. Let's start here with a detailed look at this upper section. The place to start here is with our global presets. These presets utilize various custom mic mixes and dialed-in effects to create many different tones and vibes for this upright bass. So let's go ahead and take a listen to some of these presets. As you can hear, the depth of different bass approaches and tones you can get out of this instrument is quite vast. Moving on, the upper left display box gives you real-time feedback and info as you play the bass. Last played will show you what the last articulation played was, including when the legato engine plays hammer-ons, pull-offs, or slides. Playback mode refers to which of the 3 playback modes you are in: natural, mono, or poly. The legato mode shows if the legato engine is on or off, and also what legato mode is currently being used. Finally, last action shows you the last change made using the various key switches and triggers on the keyboard. For example, toggling the legato modes, or using the 4-slide key, or pressing a 4-string key. Below this, we've included a volume slider for adding back some recording hiss to your signal. In addition, you can also add some subtle player noise, which can give an interesting live vibe to your upright bass performance. And on the bass itself, as you've probably noticed, you're seeing real-time feedback of notes being played and on what string they're playing on. Now, each string of the upright bass can be tuned up or down 2 semitones in either direction. If you want to play the bass in drop D, tune the E string down 2 semitones to lower the range of the bass. MOJO upright bass includes 8 different articulations. The first 2 are non-vibrato sustains and vibrato sustains. These two articulations can also be played with true legato transitions like hammer-ons or pull-offs. Legato transitions can also include slides between notes. We'll talk more about how to get the most out of these transitions in the instrument tab section of the video. The next articulation are the staccatos. The next two are similar to staccatos, but sampled specifically to be used for quickly repeated notes. These are our 8th note performance repetition articulation and also our 16th note performance repetition articulation. The 16th note repetitions are better for very quick playing. The 8th note repetitions, which were performed and sampled at half the speed, are better for slower repetitions. The next articulation are the harmonics. A variety of percussion hits performed on the body of the bass can be found in the percussion articulation. The last articulation are the recorded chords. We've recorded 9 different chord voicings, and these different voicings can be changed using the green keys here. Once you select a chord type, the chords can all be played as staccato chords, sustained chords, or arpeggiated chords. Now let's move on to the keyboard layout. You may have noticed that the keyboard layout changed while playing back the chords. There are a large number of controls and key switches for MOJO upright bass. So in chords mode, we remove the key switches not needed to make room for the green chord type key switches. All other articulations use the default layout for the key switches. Starting in the middle, the blue section shows the playable range of our current articulation. The red section below this lets us switch between the main articulations. Staying on the left half of the keyboard, the bottom red section are your legato controls. The first toggles on and off the legato engine. The second toggles between the 2 different legato modes, smart and auto forced. And the third turns on and off auto slides. We'll talk in more detail about these legato features in the instrument tab section. Moving above the red articulation key switches, we have a key that can be used to repeat the last played note. This can be particularly useful for quickly repeated notes, especially for the performance repetition articulations. Moving above the blue playable range are 4 yellow keys, which will force the playback onto a specific string. On an upright bass, you can find the same note on multiple strings. For example, this D can be found on 3 different strings: the E string, the A string, and the D string. Each one has a different tone and character, so anytime you want to force the engine to play a note or a series of notes on a specific string, these 4-string key switches can be very useful. Above this are 2 green keys. The first is for forcing hammer-on or pull-offs, and the second is for forcing slides. Before talking about how these work, let's discuss the built-in fretting engine. The fretting engine determines what string and what hand position a note or series of notes will be played on. The fretting engine will maintain its virtual hand position until a specific note forces it to move outside of its current position. This scale stays in the root hand position until I go too high to where it is forced to move my virtual hand position. Since the legato mode won't play legato transitions when the fretting engine is changing strings, you may want to use these forced legato keys to ensure that you get the legato transition you desire. The only exception where you won't get a legato transition is if 2 consecutive notes played don't exist on the same string. For example, the highest note you can play on the A string is this D. If you try to play a legato transition from D and the D sharp above, the engine is forced to play the D sharp on the D string without a slide, since that transition doesn't exist. To ensure you get a slide between that D and D sharp, hold down the force D string key and force slide key at the same time while playing that transition. Let's move on to the release options with these orange keys. The first orange key is on by default and is our normal release. This just means when you release a note, the note doesn't just stop, but you actually hear the sound of the finger lifting off the note played. In addition to the normal release, you have 5 different alternative release options. You can hear a slide off of your notes going either up or down. The next two are 2 different rockabilly slap release options. These are great to add a more percussive style playing to your bass performance. On a side note, these rockabilly slaps are also found in our percussion articulation. The last alternative release option is a string squeak sound, which is the sound of the fingers sliding down the string after releasing the note. The purple section are our percussion quick slot keys. These keys give you access to any 10 different sounds from the percussion articulation samples without actually having to switch to that articulation. By default, the first 2 are our 2 rockabilly slap articulations. Any of these 10 sounds can be switched out for whatever you prefer in the percussion section of the Instrument Controls tab, as we'll see later. The last and final key switch is the blue key at the top, which will toggle between the 3 different playback types in the engine: natural, poly, and mono. This is a velocity-sensitive key switch, so if you hit the key lightly, you will be in natural mode. Hitting a bit harder will give you the poly mode, and hitting it the hardest will give you the mono mode. Okay, let's move on to the Instrument tab section. The Instrument tab's first section are the global controls, starting with global volume and pan. After this is the velocity curve knob. To weight more towards softer playing, turn the knob to the left. To weight more towards louder, more aggressive playing, you can turn the knob more to the right. The capo knob will add a capo to the bass, all the way up to the 6th fret. If you want to generally use higher fretted notes, this is a great quick method to do that. String buzz is a pretty common occurrence in upright bass, so to add a bit more character and realism, don't be shy in turning this up. The hand position knob can achieve a similar effect to the capo, except you can still play below the position when needed. Let's play the scale with the hand position in its default setting. Now let's play the same scale, but with the hand position set to 4. Now any notes you play that exist in this position will be played in position 4 or as close to position 4 as possible. The upright bass is a fretless instrument, so notes being not always exactly in tune are part of the sound of a real upright bass. If you want to add a bit more of this to your playback, you can increase the humanized pitch variation with this knob. The last knob on this page is the attack offset knob. Turning this knob left from the default position will add a bit more pre-attack sound to your bass, resulting in a very natural sound, but perhaps playback might start to feel a bit less responsive. Turning right makes playback more and more responsive, but the natural pre-attack sound of the fingers on the string will start to be removed. You will probably find for most cases, the default position will work for a nice balance of being responsive yet natural sounding. The last item in the global section are the 3 playback modes for the instrument. By default, we are in the natural playback mode, which mimics a realistic hybrid mode where you can play lead lines but will also allow for polyphonic playback when it would be possible by a real player. Poly mode is great if you want to play the upright bass like a traditional keyboard bass, where there is no limitation to what notes you can play, even if it's not possible on a real bass, like these 3 notes all a semitone apart. Mono is the last mode and the most ideal for playing lead lines when you don't need any polyphonic playback. Let's move on to the Sustains tab. First, let's note that the non-vibrato sustains and vibrato sustains are all controlled from this page. The first two knobs control the volume and release time for your non-vibrato sustains, which is key switch C0 by default. Next to this are the simulated vibrato amount and speed knobs. The simulated vibrato uses extracted pitch modulation from the actual recorded vibrato samples, making for a more cohesive sound when switching from using simulated vibrato and the recorded vibrato articulation. Having control over amount and speed allows for a very expressive use of vibrato. Next to this are your volume and release time controls for the recorded vibrato sustains, which is found on key switch C#0. As a note, all the rest of the controls for sustains we will go through affect both non-vibrato and vibrato sustains. The attack accent will add a little extra impact to the beginnings of your sustains if you really want to drive in some plucked notes a bit more. As we've already discussed, there are two types of legato modes, smart and auto-forced. But before we get into the differences between these two modes, let's start by talking about how to trigger legato transitions with your MIDI playback. So let's begin with just a simple two-note transition. If I play this A to an A sharp, I need to overlap the two notes so that the release of my first note doesn't occur until the attack of my second note begins. The result here is a hammer-on transition between these two notes. And if you're not familiar, a hammer-on is the sound you get when a player presses the fret on the target note without replucking the string with their other hand. This same transition without the hammer-on effect would sound like this. A pull-off on a stringed instrument is when you go from a higher fretted note to a lower note by simply pulling your finger off the first fret while the lower note is simultaneously being held. The result is the sound of a descending transition without replucking the second note. Going from an A sharp to an A with that effect will sound like this. So the auto-force mode will play a legato transition when two or more notes are played with an overlap. So if you continue to overlap note after note, you will hear a continuous sequence of either hammer-ons or pull-offs. When you first open the instrument, legato is on and in smart mode. The smart mode will create a more human approach to whether or not legato transitions will be used. So in this example, not all overlapped notes will get a legato transition. So in short, smart mode will make a more human and realistic choice for how and when legatos will be heard. If in any case you want to ensure a legato transition occurs, you can always use the force hammer-on or force slide keys. During that previous example, you might have noticed that a few slides were played automatically. This is because auto slides are on, and that particular interval was higher than the hammer-on pull-off range slider was set to. By default, the hammer-on pull-off range is set to 2 semitones. So a legato transition above 2 semitones will be given a slide instead of a hammer-on. For this example, we're going to use the force A string key, so the fretting engine doesn't try to change strings. So now, if I move the hammer-on pull-off slider to 5 semitones, now I will get a hammer-on or pull-off up to 5 semitones, and slides will only start occurring after that interval. If I turn off auto slides, now anything beyond that interval will simply repluck the note. With auto slides off, you can still get a slide transition, but only with the force slide green key. The speed of these slides can be controlled in 3 different ways. The first and default setting is playing speed. If I play 2 notes with a long time between the first and the second note, the slide will happen at a slower speed. If the time between the first and second note occurs quickly, the engine will automatically speed up the transition. If you want to manually control the speed, select CC and control-click or right-click on the slider. Now assign the slider to any CC knob or fader. The last legato slide speed method is via velocity. The softer you play the target note of your slide, the slower the slide. If you play the target note hard, the slide will occur faster. The sustains also have a second page of release setting controls. The majority of this page is simply letting you adjust the volumes of the various release sample options. The only other variety to this control is allowing you to switch between fast, medium, or slow squeaks on the squeaks release. The staccato controls are pretty straightforward with volume and release time controls. The performance repetition controls also have volume and release, but have an additional section that lets you choose between auto or manual switching between the 8th note repetitions and the 16th note repetitions. By default, it's set to manual, so that switching between the two variations requires switching between key switches D-sharp 0 for 8th note and E0 for 16th note. If you switch to auto, the engine will now automatically toggle between the two types, depending on the time it takes between the two notes. If I set my threshold to 125 milliseconds, then any two notes played with 125 milliseconds or less between the first and second notes will get the faster 16th note articulation, while anything played slower will utilize the 8th note articulation. Keep in mind, in auto mode, you can select either D-sharp 0 or E0. So long as you have selected one of these two articulations, the auto mode will do the work behind the scenes, automatically switching articulations. The harmonic articulation controls are also simple, with just volume and release controls. The percussion page includes volume, attack, and release controls. These knobs are specific to the blue range while in the percussion articulation using F-sharp 0. The right side of this page allows you to set up your quick slot purple keys at the top. To switch anything out, you can either directly click on the name and select a new sample from the drop-down list, or you can find the sample you wish to assign in the blue playable range. Hit Learn, then re-trigger that sample to apply it to that quick slot. The chords articulation also just have a simple volume and release time control. However, as mentioned before, going to the chords articulation does change your keyboard layout while in this articulation. We've simply removed unusable keys while in the chords articulation to give more room for the green chord type keys. The last thing to mention on the instrument page controls is that if any of these articulations are unneeded, we allow you to remove them by deselecting the box below their name. This will remove these sample sets from your computer's memory. The performance page contains hundreds of custom MIDI performances in various styles. These can be great song starters, inspiration for something new, or just a way to get familiar with this instrument. There are a few filters to help narrow down your results. Let's start by trying some Latin performances. We'll keep our meter and scale set to all for now. The key column is a little different in that it's not a filter, but it can be used to transpose the performance playback to the key you've selected. To preview our search results, hit the speaker icon to turn on audio playback. Now, as we select different performances, we will hear them play back in the key you've selected and at the BPM of your host. Changing the key not only changes the audio preview of that performance, but when dragging out a MIDI file of that performance using the MIDI icon, the exported region will also be in the key you've selected. You can create a list of favorite performances by clicking the star icon next to any performance name. Now, by clicking the star at the top of the column, you can display all your favorited performances. Let's check out a few more performances by narrowing down our search results. Let's select Jazz, 6/8, and also let's only show performances in minor keys. The effects page contains 8 different effects to choose from. Each individual effect includes custom presets to help you get started quickly. Let's go to a few of these effects and try out some presets. For starters, on the EQ, let's try out Sub Enhance. For the saturation, you'll find a wide range of presets from very subtle to very aggressive. Let's stick with something subtle with this preset here. Let's add some compression to bring the sound of the bass nice and up front. This preset called Front and Center should do the trick. The reverb utilizes a large collection of impulse responses, putting the bass in all sorts of different types of spaces. Let's try Nice Hall to hear the bass in a larger setting. For something a little more intimate, let's try Studio Vibes. And lastly, for just a bit more dimension, let's add a little slap delay using the Vintage Slap preset. By default, the mixer has loaded up the full mix position. This is a pre-mixed stereo combination created from our various other mic positions. However, 5 different mic positions were recorded for the bass and can be mixed together depending on your need. Keep in mind, this instrument is recorded in a lot of detail, so the library is quite large and you will need a fair amount of computer memory as you start adding multiple mic positions together. The first 3 are all mono-mic'd positions. The appropriately named neck position will give you the most detailed sound of the strings themselves. The body close position won't have as much detail in the string sounds, but will give you the most low-end and bassy tone of all the mic positions. Body far is also mono-mic'd, set back further from the instrument for a less up-close approach, but while still being fairly dry sounding, without too much room tone. Our first of the 2 stereo mic'd room positions is the room close position. This position was still set fairly close to the instrument in an ORTF miking technique, giving you plenty of clarity of the instrument while also giving you a beautiful perspective of the room itself. Lastly is the room far position, utilizing an A-B miking technique, set a ways away from the instrument, giving you the most ambient sound of all the mic positions. So let's say you want something set back in the mix a bit. Let's turn on body far mic and room far mic. Blending those 2 together will give you a nice starting point for something not too up front in your mix. For something quite different from those mics, let's try blending the neck mic and body close mic. Now for just a touch of stereo width, let's also turn on our room close mic. At the bottom of each mic position is a drop-down menu, allowing you to output each mic position to its own channel in your DAW, giving you maximum mixing control over the signal of each mic. To utilize this feature, however, you'll need to be using the multi-output version of Kontakt to have the additional channels for this feature. The settings page includes more detailed customizations for the instrument. When the MIDI articulation select is on, the tabs in the instrument controls page will automatically change as you switch between articulations using the key switches. Below this control are 3 release key mode options. Just a reminder, there are 6 different release sample options, with the default being the normal release. In latch mode, the last selected release option will remain on until a new release option is selected. In non-latch mode, you'll need to continuously hold down any alternative release option to stay in that mode. Once you release that key, the release mode will automatically return to the normal release. The last release mode option is called Perform. This changes all the alternative release options into performable triggers. If I play a note, then press the Rockabilly Slap release option, the Rockabilly Slap is played immediately as I press that key. The only exception in this mode is the normal release option, which is always active unless you perform an alternative release. You can automate most of the controls in MOJO Upright Bass by control-clicking on a knob or slider, then assigning them to a MIDI controller of your choice. However, a few options in this instrument don't allow for that, so we've given you the ability to assign a MIDI CC to those here. So if you want to program into your performance a change between the squeak speeds, you can assign that MIDI CC here. Some groups of key switches can be set to latch or non-latch in this last section of this page. By default, the articulation key switches are set to latch. This means once you switch to any articulation, it will remain in that articulation until you switch to a new articulation. If you turn this off, you would need to hold down the articulation you want to play continuously. Once released, the articulation option would automatically switch back to the non-vibrato sustains. Setting legato to latch will make both the force hammer-on pull-off key switch and the force slide key switch to remain on until you press the key a second time to deactivate it. Turning on latch for force string will work similarly. Once you press a force string key, that will remain on until you press a different force string key or press the key a second time to turn it off. If latch is off for either this option or the force legato options, those keys will need to be continuously held down to be active. Once released, that mode is turned off. The 3 remaining tabs on the settings page are your mapping pages. Here you can create custom layouts for the key switches. This can be adjusted in 2 different ways. The first way is simply clicking and dragging on the current MIDI location for any key switch. The second way is to use the Learn button. Click the Learn on any key switch item, then on your MIDI keyboard, click the note you'd like to assign the item to. Keep in mind, you can't have 2 key switches mapped to the same MIDI location. When this occurs, you will see this notification letting you know that you need to change the MIDI location to a different MIDI note. You can create a stack of articulations by using the velocity button on 2 or more different articulations. For example, let's turn on this button for the sustains and staccatos. Now, by setting the velocity range for sustains from 1 to 99 and the staccatos from 100 to 127, we will hear sustains in this softer range, then staccatos when played harder. This creative velocity stack is available whether you have selected the non-vibrato sustains on C0 or the staccatos on D0. If you wanted to add more articulations to this velocity stack, you may do so, but you would need to adjust your velocity ranges so that no overlaps exist. Well, that about covers everything on this full walkthrough for MOJO upright bass. As a courtesy to our customers, we have provided the MIDI files for 2 of our online demos. With these MIDI files, you'll be able to see even more what's possible with this incredible instrument. To download these MIDI files, go to virtu.com, click on the Support tab, and select Downloads. Thanks everybody for checking out this video. We'll see you in the next one.